Do not mistake Mardi Gras for harmless celebration. Beneath the masks, beneath the brass and the drunken laughter, there is always another carnival unfolding, one without parades, one without music, one that devours the living. You were never meant to hear this story, for it stains the silk of Louisiana's proudest tradition with a shadow that refuses to fade. They will tell you Mardi Gras is a festival of liberty, of masks and freedom. But the year was 1846, and liberty belonged only to those who already owned lives. For the enslaved, the festival was a mockery, a pageant that thundered in the streets, while silence reigned in the quarters, while chains whispered louder than music. And it was in this silence that a woman named Mary carried her years like a crucifix. She was not Mary by choice. That name was forced upon her, an erasure pressed into ink and ledgers. Beneath it, older names breathed in the marrow of her bones, the names her mother called when storms gathered, the names sung in half-forgotten lullabies ripped from the African shore. She did not speak them. To do so would have been to invite punishment. But she carried them as one carries charms in the dark, invisible, indestructible, burning against the skin. Her mistress believed herself merciful. She struck less often, and when she did, she called it correction, not cruelty. The master cloaked his debt-ridden pride in gestures of nobility, pretending that his collapsing empire was still a kingdom of order. Their children played games of command, tugging Mary like a doll, learning the grammar of cruelty before their milk teeth had even fallen. And Mary endured. She endured with a silence so perfect that her oppressors mistook it for obedience. But silence, when sharpened long enough, becomes a weapon. The kitchen was her cathedral, the fire her altar. There, patience and pain fused into knowledge. She learned how flesh yields to slow heat. She learned how smoke carries secrets. She learned that endurance is not surrender, but the storing of power. And in her memory, she kept a ledger no one could erase, a tally of every theft, every humiliation, every wound inflicted under the disguise of mercy. On the night when New Orleans sang its loudest songs, Mary's silence reached its breaking point. They say the devil walks openly on Mardi Gras, collecting what the world owes him. But that year, in the depths of a Louisiana kitchen, it was not the devil who came to collect. It was Mary. The house dressed itself for Mardi Gras as though it were a queen awaiting her coronation. Fabrics shimmered, ribbons hung in doorways, and the mistress powdered her pride until it gleamed like porcelain. Yet behind that polished spectacle, another theater persisted, one invisible to visitors, but carved into Mary's skin with every passing day. Every step in the kitchen was rehearsed, every word calculated. The children, giddy with anticipation of costumes and masks, rehearsed their cruelty like a script. They commanded, they corrected, they laughed. To them, Mary was not flesh and memory. She was an instrument, a shadow, a servant to their play. And Mary watched. Always, she watched. From the old cook, her bent back a library of pain, Mary had inherited lessons, how to stretch rations into meals, how to bend fire into discipline, how to bend herself without breaking. From whispers in the quarters, she gathered fragments of maps disguised as songs, escape routes braided into hair, sermons that spoke of chains broken in dreams, if not in daylight. From a reckless deckhand with too much rum on his breath, she learned letters. Letters became words. Words became numbers. And numbers revealed the truth her master thought buried in ledgers. His debts grew like weeds, strangling the roots of his household, while he strutted as though fortune still bowed to him. Mary understood. She saw how fragile the empire truly was. The master's dignity was an act. The mistress's gentleness was another form of cruelty, the kind that insists on gratitude. And the children's games were not innocent. They were rehearsal for a world that would demand obedience through command. Mary endured each moment, not as a victim, but as a witness. Every act of degradation became another entry in her private book of reckonings, a chest of debts too heavy to remain unopened forever. They say, some debts belong not to men, but to darker forces. That when cruelty festers long enough, the air itself demands payment. In Louisiana, whispers spread that the devil himself prowled Mardi Gras in search of overdue accounts. The masters laughed at such tales. The enslaved did not. Mary did not put her faith in demons or angels. She put her faith in arithmetic, the arithmetic of wrongs unavenged. Every insult, every wound, every theft was a coin dropped into her hidden coffer. And on that Mardi Gras night, the coffer had grown too heavy to carry. The night arrived swollen with music. Horns wailed in the streets, drums cracked the air, and torches flickered like spirits dancing. Mardi Gras was a storm, a delirium of sound and color, a mask to hide the decay beneath. While the city poured itself into wine-soaked revelry, the plantation house sat like a jeweled coffin, silent except for the muffled laughter of its family. They were preparing a feast, a performance of wealth, though wealth had long since rotted from their grasp. Guests were expected, appearances had to be preserved, and Mary, as always, was the invisible architect of it all. In the kitchen, fire licked the iron pot with a hunger that mirrored her own. Oil bubbled, hissing like a serpent disturbed. The mistress called down instructions between adjusting her jewels, too proud to notice the tone in Mary's voice when she answered, "Yes, ma'am." The children ran through the halls, their costumes rustling, their wooden swords striking walls, each echo a rehearsal for futures of dominion. And the master paced, wine already staining his lips, muttering of debts and honor, convinced that one more night of appearances might delay the wolves at his door. But Mary did not hear them as she once had. That night, their voices blurred into noise, like the faraway music from the city. She heard only the oil, the fire, the pulse of her own breath. She remembered the lashings that had bent her back but not broken her. She remembered the mistress demanding gratitude for scraps, the master's hand that took what was not his, the children laughing as they rehearsed their cruelty on her body. She remembered, and remembering became resolve. They say the human mind can cross a threshold, a place where suffering boils so long it transforms into clarity. That night, Mary stepped across it. She was not merely a servant bending to commands. She was a ledger come to life, a reckoning clothed in flesh. The kitchen was no longer her prison. It was her sanctuary, her altar. And the bubbling oil was not just for food. It was the molten core of her decision. Upstairs, the mistress called again for more wine. The master cursed a missing ledger. The children shrieked with laughter. And in the kitchen, Mary lifted the heavy iron ladle, her arms steady as stone. In the reflection of the oil, faces seemed to flicker, not only her own, but those of the generations whose names had been stolen, whose songs had been silenced. They were there, watching, waiting. Mardi Gras had begun, and so had the true carnival, the carnival of vengeance. They say vengeance has a sound. It is not the roar of fire, nor the scream of the condemned. It is quieter, more intimate, the moment when silence breaks like a bone. In that Louisiana kitchen, the silence ended when Mary moved. Not with fury, not with haste, but with the precision of someone who has rehearsed a ritual in her mind 1,000 times. The mistress was the first. She entered without suspicion, her silk skirts whispering against the doorway. She came not as an enemy, but as a queen accustomed to obedience, expecting her servant to bow to the weight of her jewels. Mary greeted her as always, a bowed head, a steady hand. But the air was different. Even the mistress, slow to sense anything but her own reflection, faltered for half a heartbeat. Too late. Mary seized her by the wrist, strength born of years of endurance snapping the illusion of superiority in a single motion. The scream never reached its full shape before the boiling oil swallowed it. They say flesh in fire makes a sound that cannot be forgotten. The walls themselves seemed to recoil. The children, curious and startled, ran toward the kitchen, wooden swords still in hand, their laughter curdling into confusion as they entered. What they saw was not the docile servant they had tormented, but a figure transformed, a sentinel of heat and judgment. For a heartbeat, their eyes widened with the dawning recognition that games have consequences. Then Mary's hands moved again. One child fell with a scream that split the air, another slipped on the slick floor in panic, the third froze, paralyzed by the horror of seeing authority collapse. They were not victims of rage. They were entries being balanced in a ledger, names crossed out with fire. Mary's movements were neither frenzied nor wild. They were deliberate, each act a stroke of arithmetic written in agony. The master arrived last. He staggers. Ed in, wine staining his shirt, rage already boiling at the disruption of his carefully crafted facade. He shouted commands as though words alone could reassert control. But Mary did not bow. For the first time, she raised her eyes to him, steady, unbroken, and in that gaze he saw the collapse of everything, his debts, his pride, his dominion. She did not rush. She did not plead. She simply carried the final act to its conclusion. And then silence. Only the fire remained, crackling, hissing, whispering over what had been done. Mardi Gras roared outside, but within those walls, another carnival had ended. One that no mask could conceal. When dawn came, the house stood strangely quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The revelry of Mardi Gras still echoed in the streets beyond, brass horns staggering through morning light, drunken laughter dissolving into exhaustion. But the plantation manor, once a stage for vanity and pretense, was now a tomb. Smoke drifted faintly from the kitchen chimney, carrying with it a smell no passerby could mistake for food. It clung to the air, acrid and heavy, whispering of things unspoken. The neighbors came first, drawn by unease, then by curiosity, then by fear. They found the master's estate in disarray. The mistress and children gone, their absence explained only by what the fire refused to consume. In the center of it all was Mary. Some claimed she stood still as a statue, her dress scorched, her face calm as stone. Others swore she laughed, her voice carrying like a hymn across the fields. And still others whispered that she had vanished entirely, leaving only the echoes of her vengeance behind. The law descended with haste. They could not permit such a story to spread, for rebellion was a fire more dangerous than any oil or torch. The official record was swift and clinical: murder, madness, punishment. They said Mary was seized, bound, and hanged within days, her body left as a warning to others. But whispers contradicted the record. Some said the rope snapped, that no tree could hold her. Others claimed the river swallowed her, carrying her spirit down into the swamps, where her name was still spoken in hushed tones. The enslaved told her story not as tragedy, but as testament. Around fires in the quarters, Mary became more than flesh. She became a force, a reckoning that could not be silenced. Children whispered that if you listened on Mardi Gras night, you could hear the hiss of boiling oil beneath the music, a reminder that every moth conceals a debt waiting to be paid. Her name, forced upon her, now carried weight not of erasure but of defiance. Mary was no longer property. She was legend. And yet, legends are not safe. They are hunted by those who fear them, distorted by those who wish to erase them. In newspapers, her story was twisted into grotesque warning. In whispers, it became prophecy. And in the deep places of Louisiana, where the swamps breathe secrets into the air, her presence lingers, half woman, half reckoning, waiting for the carnival to rise again. The years marched on, but Mary did not fade. If anything, her absence made her larger. The plantation where the fire once hissed eventually rotted into ruin, swallowed by vines and silence. But the story refused to die. It slipped into the blood of Louisiana like a toxin, carried in whispers, traded in secret, until Mary became something more than woman. She became warning. She became omen. Children of the enslaved grew into elders who told the tale with careful reverence. They said Mary was not punished, but transformed, that the oil baptized her, burned away her chains, and left behind a spirit sharpened by suffering. They claimed that on Mardi Gras night, when masks glitter and drunken joy floods the streets, Mary walks unseen, searching. Some say she moves among the dancers, her face hidden behind a mask, her eyes gleaming with the memory of fire. Others insist she lingers in kitchens, her presence felt in the sudden hiss of grease, in the bitter edge of smoke that makes a feast taste wrong. And still others whisper darker things, that Mary is not a ghost, but a pact, that those who have suffered too long, those who bear the weight of debts unpaid, can call upon her, not with prayers, but with silence, with endurance, with rage held tight until it boils over. She comes not as comfort, but as reckoning. And when she comes, no mask, no master, no law can shield the guilty from the heat of her judgment. The city tried to erase her. Priests called her tale blasphemy. Officials called it sedition. Newspapers mocked it as superstition. But the more they denied her, the stronger she became. For Mary was not bound to paper or law. She was bound to memory, to the invisible ledger of pain that every enslaved soul carried. Her story was the proof that silence is not the end. It is the prelude. On Mardi Gras, when revelers flood the French Quarter in masks of gold and pearl, some still claim to hear her, a faint crackle, like oil over flame, rising beneath the brass bands, a shadow slipping between crowds, never quite seen, never quite gone. She is the mask that cannot be removed, the story that cannot be silenced. For Mardi Gras is a festival of masks, but Mary is the mask that stares back. And when you meet her gaze, you remember. Joy and terror are two sides of the same carnival. Time has a way of burying the guilty and gilding the innocent, but Mary's story resists burial. It lingers, refusing to be neatly tucked away in ledgers or sermons. For every generation that tried to erase her, another rose to speak her name in whispers, to breathe her fire back into the world. And Mardi Gras, that grand theater of masks and music, became her perfect stage. For what is Mardi Gras, if not a lie dressed in silk? The city wears its colors, its jewels, its feathers, and pretends that history is gone, pretends that pain is forgotten, pretends that beneath the laughter there are no chains rattling in the dark. But Mary is the reminder, the shadow that threads through parades, the hiss beneath the trumpet's wail, the mask in the crowd whose eyes linger on you too long, unblinking, patient. Some say she has no face, only the memory of fire. Others claim she appears as an ordinary woman, carrying a tray of food, her gaze lowered, her silence perfect, until it isn't. There are stories of kitchens where pots boil over without reason, of revelers who vanish into alleyways, never to return, their last screams drowned by music. They call it superstition. They call it madness. But the city remembers. The city cannot help but remember. For Mardi Gras is not only celebration, it is chaos dressed as joy. And chaos is where Mary thrives. She is not merely ghost or legend. She is a question that no mask can answer. What happens when silence burns too long? What happens when the debts of cruelty come due? So when you stand in the streets of New Orleans, the music rattling your chest, the masks blinding you with color, remember that the carnival is older than the parades. Remember that beneath the silk and gold, there is always another face watching. Perhaps you'll hear it, the faint, sinister hiss of oil, too close, too steady, as if it were right beside you. Perhaps you'll glimpse it, a figure that doesn't quite move with the crowd. And when you do, don't stare too long, for Mary is not forgotten. Mary is patient, and Mary, they say, always comes for those who mistake obedience for silence.